I kind of feel like it's going to be something out of left field, right? Like Trump is just like, oh, it's Tuesday and I like Bitcoin, and tweets that, and Bitcoin just.
So, welcome back, everyone, to yet another episode of Zillennial Money Season 2. My name is Andy. As always, today we have somewhat of a half-full house because Dom is too cool to join us. So, he's getting ready for a battle or something. So, it's just going to be the rest of the crew. But we have somewhat of a full house, but we do have a completely full docket. So, why don't we not waste any more time and jump right into it. So the first story that I wanted to talk about today is kind of sad that we're talking about this on, like, we're talking about good news around Bitcoin on a day when it was one of the worst days in Bitcoin and in the stock market for that matter in a really long time. So usually we do this show on Thursdays, but because of scheduling conflicts, I had to push it back to Friday. And I'm not sure if you guys watched the market today, but I mean, Bitcoin is still at like 95K ish at the time of recording this, but it feels like it might as well be at 9,500, judging by the mood on X and just, in our group chats and stuff like that. So before we jump into the good news around Bitcoin, I actually just wanted to pass this question off to you guys. Like, what do you guys think is, like, the issue, right? Because it seems like we've been getting nothing but good news in Bitcoin for a while, but like, why is just the market not reacting, and why is it like just why is everything sucky is basically what I'm trying to say. But just a quick few minutes and then we'll jump into the good news, but let's get the ugly news out of the way first.
I feel like at this point it's being artificially kept low. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. It's like, there's been a lot of good news, and there has been a lot of. I get the sense there's been a lot of actions being made to encourage real, what's the word? Retail investors to sell stuff, and allow the institutional investors to scoop up all of the stuff that they're selling. So I think that's a big part of it, is that it's just that this is kind of being treated like a consolidation period for the institutions. They're building their bags before they want it to be running more so. And I think that it's just been that we haven't really had any big catalysts that have like flipped the script, where it's like to the point where it's been moving up too rapidly for them to keep it low. So I think it's just been kind of like they can kind of like the institutions can reduce the amount that's going through to a larger extent when there's less volume. Whereas once there is sufficient volume, they can't really do anything. So I think that we're kind of just been in a period where there hasn't been sufficient actual volume. There's just been a lot of good news without any major crazy buys going on. Like, for example, like the SBRs haven't gone through yet, and there's like a significant number of other items where it's like it's looking good, but it's not actually materialized in terms of significant buying yet. And I think the part of that is also like when we think about like some of the news we've gotten, like, for example, like BMO and other major banks buying Bitcoin ETFs. I think that it's very much just an effort going on to shake out as many retail investors and have institutions pick up those shares at a lower price. And since the institutions, they're smarter than the average retail investor, because they obviously have more information, so they can kind of play this system a lot more efficiently than you or I can, if that makes sense. So like, and they can use that to ensure that they are getting a better rate than they may otherwise have been. And they also have other avenues to purchase Bitcoin through that you or I don't have access to, that wouldn't affect the price to the same extent. So they can do buys without necessarily affecting the price to the extent that, you know, a million people buying Bitcoin all at once would. So I think we're basically just waiting for the next big major catalyst. I don't know if that'll what format that'll come in, but you know, maybe it'll be the Fed, maybe it'll be something else, but I think we're kind of just in a holding period for now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the price like floor for Bitcoin was kind of hovering in that 60,000 range. The ceiling was like 74 before Trump got elected. So I think that like the bump we got and the euphoria we got up until like close to 200 109,000 or whatever has been the current peak, just reflects that the like I guess like there was like a soft ban on Bitcoin under the Biden administration. That's how I like to describe it, at least. And I think that just reflects that that's gone. So we have a new floor. I think that the bullish news of a Bitcoin friendly administration is mostly priced in. Yes, there's going to be buying pressure when the United States like potentially builds a Bitcoin stockpile. It's not clear if the Bitcoin stockpile will actually be new purchases, but rather just take all the confiscated Bitcoin and hold on to it. I agree with Tristan that like market makers are able to smooth out price action when like big buyers are jumping in. They're able to do scheduled buys, and there's a lot of like ways that market makers can facilitate these big buys without messing with the market too much. And I think that like a lot of the volatility just gets smoothed out naturally when like an asset becomes an asset that institutional buyers get interested in it. But I think overall it's just a consolidation. Like something has to cause consolidation, and this is where we are now. Like we had our big bump in November. It's been stalled out. I feel like any day now we're gonna like break through our resistance at around 108, 109. Don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but I think it's just normal consolidation. And I think a lot of the news since Jerome Powell's most recent meetings has created a lot of uncertainty in the market about how much liquidity is going to get pumped in. So I think that's a lot of market action that we're seeing across the board right now, especially the risk assets, and what's going on with the 10-year yields is actually very much just related to the job owning that Jerome Powell's been doing for the last 3 or 4 years and tightening. He doesn't want to like make the market too bullish on news that they're going to end quantitative easing soon and all that stuff. So I think those kind of catalysts, like the actual macroeconomic catalysts, like the end of quantitative easing and expansionary monetary policy, is obviously going to help Bitcoin. But like that's just not, we don't know when M2 money expansion is going to happen. There's a lot of unknowns there. And I think that Jerome Powell is doing his hardest to actually like keep the market from getting too hot, because he is talking about slowing down rate cuts all of a sudden. I think that was the market didn't really like that news that they received in January. And I think that we're actually just seeing the market work it out. I think we're just in a normal liquidity cycle and a normal consolidation period. And I think that when liquidity returns to risk assets, Bitcoin is going to be one of the assets that benefits most from it.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I don't have too much to add because I think you guys hit on most of what I was going to talk about anyways. And maybe I'll just talk about one thing that I actually forgot to add it to the docket, but I was showing Tristan this and he would have seen it a bit before as well, where, you know, there's the Bitcoin cycle being compared to previous cycles. And there's different ways you can compare it. If you start from like the halving, or if you start from the top of the cycle, or if you start from the bottom of the cycle. So I think if you click on the one that's like the bottom of the cycle and it compares the ROI of Bitcoin, we're actually tracking the 2017 cycles pretty well still. I know like it seems like Bitcoin is doing horribly, like it seems like it's gone nowhere, but keep in mind we did rise from like around the 60K range to 100K really quickly within a matter of like a month or two after the Trump win, after the Trump election, right? So stuff like that, it can happen really fast. And then also, if you look at the 2017 cycle, I'll pull up a chart a little bit later, and I'll put it in post here. We're still kind of tracking that. And if we continue to follow that cycle, then it appears that we'll start to go up like in a massive way in the coming, 2-3 months from now. So until that happens, I predict that we're probably going to chop around for a while. And I think February, it's been a historically strong month for the post-halving year of a cycle. So like, 2017, 2021, and then now 2025. Historically, it's been strong, but in 2025, it has not been strong. And I just think maybe February is kind of a toss away month because of various reasons that you guys described, like Jay Powell being hawkish and the Trump tariff threats and all that stuff. So it's like a special circumstance, but I feel like we will still somewhat eventually track the 2017 cycle, and if that happens, that might even be a better case, right? Because you'd want to follow the 2017 cycle more than the 2021 cycle, because the 2017 cycle, you got a nice long and clean peak, right? Like a nice long clean bull run, as opposed to 2021. It was a lot more choppy, and we had a double peak and stuff like that. I just think that in the end, if we can get something like a 2017 cycle, I know we're probably not going to track it 1-to-1 for the whole cycle, because if we do, then Bitcoin hit like $2 million by the end of this year, which I don't think is going to happen. It might happen, but I don't think it's very likely. But still, it doesn't have to hit 2 million, right? If it hits 500,000, then we'll all be chilling on a beach in some Caribbean island. Sunil, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another factor. I think this is a Cold War between Trump and Jerome Powell about interest rates, where Trump is saying drop rates now and kind of using his bully pulpit. I guess Powell, I don't know. I think a lot of his current language around keeping things tighter is mostly performative. I think the Trump's going to win this Cold War, and I think interest rates are going to drop a lot faster than most people expect them to. That's just my speculation. I don't have any evidence to prove it, but I do really feel like we're going to get a lot more rate cuts than people are expecting.
That would be nice, because if we're going down because we're pricing in less rate cuts than we were expecting, if it all of a sudden that reverses, then I feel like we're going to see kind of the opposite of what we've been seeing for the past like 3 months, which is, just Bitcoin grinding and going nowhere. If it really does get priced in that we're going to get more rate cuts than we were expecting, then I think that's going to really kickstart the Bitcoin bull run for reals. Actually talking about the Bitcoin bull run, we've talked about several ideas of what could be the catalyst that really starts the bull run. I just named one like 10 seconds ago, which is, Jay Powell, the Fed, if they become more dovish and stuff like that, more rate cuts. But there's also another thing that I wanted to talk about, which I think could also be the spark that ignites the powder keg, which is the strategic Bitcoin reserve. But I'm not talking about the national strategic Bitcoin reserve. I'm talking about the state strategic national reserve within each US state. So if you guys look at this, I got this from Bitcoin Laws. They have a great website and X channel, so go follow them if you haven't already on X. But basically, these guys, they put together a nice visual representation of all the states that have a Bitcoin strategic reserve bill that is in progress. And I already hear people complaining, so I got to explain this every time. a lot of these bills are introduced as digital asset bills and don't mention the word Bitcoin. So people get angry and they're like, oh, you're just lumping in some random like meme coin or like, shit coin bill and calling it a Bitcoin strategic reserve. But you haven't read into the fine print, right? So the fine print says, and they're all worded similarly. And this is credit to Dennis Porter, who's like one of the lobbyists for Bitcoin, who's pushing all these and pioneered the language. So the way that these digital asset bills are set up is that the market capitalization of whatever coin that they're investing in, it has to be over a certain amount for the duration of the past 12 months, or the past year. And if you see this one, so this is the latest one. This is details about a bill in Iowa for a strategic Bitcoin reserve or a digital asset reserve. But you can see that it's highlighted that the market capitalization of that digital asset has to be over $750 billion over the past year. And only Bitcoin fits that bill, right? Because Ethereum's market cap is, I don't think it even is $750 billion now, never mind, averaging that over the course of the previous year. So Bitcoin is the only one. They structured it this way because the term digital assets, it goes over a lot easier than saying Bitcoin, right? Because among politicians, and most of the politicians in the US are, boomers and older people, let's just say. And among, the older generation, they might get intimidated hearing Bitcoin because a lot of people have a negative connotation to that. But if you say digital assets, that sounds more technology related. And although it could be kind of daunting to some people as well, but it's harder to go against a digital asset bill because you might get framed as being anti-innovation. Like you're more likely to be called anti-innovation if you go against a digital asset bill. So let me just clear the air about that. That's why like these SBRs, strategic Bitcoin reserve bills, they're structured as digital asset bills, but they're actually Bitcoin only. But anyways, so Iowa has filed one, and you can see that if you look at the chart on the left, some states have more than one. And the reason for that is because some states have a House bill and a Senate bill, whereas some, they just have one bill. But you can see that UT, which is Utah, is the farthest along. They've basically just has the Senate, the Utah State Senate just has to vote on it. And then the governor has to sign it, and then that's it. But if we see other ones, there's other ones that have just been introduced. So you can see the progress on it. I just talked about the Iowa one in detail. And if you look at the map down here, so there's 20 states that have 26 live SBR bills at the moment in the United States. Some of them did not pass. I know like Pennsylvania tried one and Wyoming tried one, and then those two unfortunately did not, was rejected. But the 20, and again, the reason why it's 20 states with 26 bills is because some states have more than one going at the same time. So this is an idea, this is my idea of one potential catalyst that could ignite the next big bull run, because these states have a lot of money too, and if they just allocate like, I don't know, 10 billion, 5 billion, or like even 1 billion into Bitcoin, that's a lot of Bitcoin, right? And then that's a lot of buying pressure. And this is like, imagine MicroStrategy buys like, a few hundred million to over $1 billion. And this weekend they might buy 2 billion because they just did another bond raise. But usually they buy like, a few $100 million per week, and they've been doing that consistently. Imagine that you have, I don't know, 20 states, right? So 20 MicroStrategies worth of buying pressure every week instead of one MicroStrategy, right? So technically it's 21, because if it's all enacted, you have 20 states plus MicroStrategy. So that's a lot of buying pressure that could be potentially coming in, and this state SBR thing might turn out to be more important than the national one, because I know everyone's focusing on the national one, but I think not enough people are paying attention to the state bills, the individual state bills, and I think that might be a mistake, because I think that this is something that's really exciting and that you should be paying attention to, because this has the potential to be the catalyst that really gets the bull run going. So I'm not sure what you guys think of it. Do you guys think I'm overhyping this? Is this a bigger deal? Is this a bigger or lesser deal than I'm making it sound like? Or do you generally agree with what I said? So I'm happy to hear your thoughts, whoever wants to go first.
I mean, I think that the states getting on the Bitcoin standard is very bullish, because I would be less worried about. I don't know what the political dynamics are of every state. I couldn't really tell you, but I just think that there's a higher chance of political gridlock in Washington D.C. and getting like 60 votes in the Senate to pass a Bitcoin strategic reserve would be a lot more difficult than passing it at the state level. So I think that I'm more bullish on it, just that I think that this could create more of a FOMO rally, if the federal government does it in the US, then I think that it's more likely to be like a stockpile where they just take the confiscated Bitcoin and just move it over from like the Justice Department to the Treasury, or I don't know if the Treasury or the Fed would hold it, but I guess it's the Treasury that would hold the Bitcoin. I just think the political gridlock is more of a factor at the federal level than it is at the state level. I also think that this is a really interesting model for just government finances, because of like subordinate regional governments start to hold strategic reserve assets, and that becomes a part of their balance sheet that could change government budgeting. This could be a very revolutionary thing to happen in governance. And I also think that there's an inevitability. I'm disappointed that not one person in this country is talking about it, but there's an inevitability that Canadian provinces can use this as a funding mechanism and as a mechanism for saving their like provincial wealth. So I just think the economics of it's very interesting. Can I suggest some catalysts that I think are coming online on top of this, or do you want? Yeah. So the other catalyst that's kind of been talked about is American banks holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet, which will require some legislative changes. I think that's actually more likely to get passed than the National Strategic Reserve in a short period of time too. So I'm bullish. I'm very bullish about that. I think there's a lot of bullishness around MicroStrategy and how it can change. It can continuously and gradually change the institutional conversation around Bitcoin. Like the FOMO of corporate treasuries jumping on Bitcoin is something that could be a major catalyst in the next few months. And then I'll just make my prediction of what the next big corporate catalyst will be. And the one that creates the most FOMO is I have a feeling that Meta is going to do it. I think that Mark Zuckerberg is a Bitcoiner, and I think he has the voting power that's similar to Michael Saylor, that he can get this through if he decides to do it. And I kind of have a feeling that Meta is going to be the next big mega cap tech company to start a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And this is like really bullish, because when you consider the balance sheet, like how much money the company like Meta, how much cash a company like Meta has on its balance sheet, they wouldn't even have to do what MicroStrategy is doing. They could just devote like 5 to 10% of their cash pile to Bitcoin in a very short period of time and be one of the biggest holders in the world. So I kind of have a feeling that's going to be the biggest catalyst coming up in the next little while.
Yeah, I could definitely see it. I mean, Meta's it would be great because they could integrate maybe Bitcoin and Lightning into Messenger. I know Messenger is one of, at least for me, is my most used messaging app that has replaced text messaging for me. And the reason why is just because quite frankly, it's the best messaging platform. And I hate to say it because, like, you know, I have mixed feelings about Zuckerberg. Maybe he's like improved a little in my opinion now, especially with his latest, I don't know, pivot. But in the past, I used to really dislike Zuckerberg. But I still have to admit, even back then, that the Facebook Messenger is miles ahead of anything else that's on the market, just because it's so multi-platform and it has, you know, kind of advanced features for its time, right? It was like one of the first to includes things like, stickers and gifts and all this stuff. At least, like, in my opinion, it probably wasn't the first, but I just remember it was like pretty revolutionary when those things were brought to Messenger. Maybe I'm revealing my age a little, but yeah, anyways, it would be great if Meta can add like Bitcoin Lightning into Messenger, right? Can just zap people using Messenger like Bitcoin instantly. Tristan, your thoughts on everything we talked about? What do you think the big catalyst is? The state SBR thing I mentioned, or do you have your own suggestions as well as to what you think might kick off this bull market?
Yeah. So I think the state SBRs could be a potential contributor to like catalyst event. I'm not sure if they will be the specific one, given that basically only Utah is anywhere close to getting it done. The other ones are significantly further behind, and there's no guarantee any of them are going to pass it. There's no guarantee that Utah is going to pass it at the end of the day. I mean, I think it's likely they will, but again, I'm just saying. So I'm not sure if the SBR specifically will be. I think that probably the Fed is really going to be a big contributing factor for whether or not we're going to get a big catalyst event. So, for example, like if the Fed flips monetary policy on and starts cutting rates again, I think that we're going to see a significantly larger impact on stocks and Bitcoin, but than the SBRs. Now, I mean, maybe the SBRs would, because at the same time with the SBRs, like, I don't think that it's going to pass on like a Monday and they're going to be buying Bitcoin on the Tuesday either. So the news might be really bullish, but at this point, I'm not sure to what extent the dumb money is able to move the markets on these on Bitcoin, etc., compared to the institutions and big buys from like the actual SBR creation, right? So like I would say that Utah actually buying a bunch of Bitcoin would be more likely to move the mark than a bunch of people seeing that Utah has allowed themselves to buy it, if that makes sense. So and then with the Fed, like every time the monetary policy gets reduced, we basically see like the interest rate, we basically continually see a big move to risk assets, and Bitcoin is considered a risk asset. So at this point, that's why we saw such a big shake when they stopped cutting rates back in January or December, I guess it was. So on that front, I'm not sure if that's going to be the what specifically of those is going to be the next catalyst, if either. But I'm hoping that it's going to be upcoming soon. And with regards to what will be the next catalyst, I don't really have that many good theories on what it's going to be. I kind of feel like it's going to be something out of left field, right? Like Trump is just like, it's Tuesday and I like Bitcoin, and tweets that, and Bitcoin just skyrockets or something. It's like, crazy stuff like that happens all the time. And in this market, like every time Trump basically does anything, the market seems to move 10% in either direction. So I think that fact alone means that the likelihood that there's a catalyst that none of us just see coming is a lot higher. And I mean, heck, we didn't see there was a Ethereum theft today or yesterday or something like that, and we didn't see that coming. I didn't wake up this morning and be like, wow, Bitcoin is at 90, 98, 99, is like shit's going back up. And then out of left wing, someone stole $1.4 billion of Ethereum. Oh no. Yeah. Congratulations, you got some trash.
I heard it was North Korea, and like I've seen people post on X that North Korea is now the first nation in the world to establish a strategic Ethereum reserve ahead of everyone, ahead of the US, ahead of China. 1.4 billion, that's a sizable bag too.
Maybe they'll swap it for Bitcoin if they're smart.
We'll leave the Ethereum debate to another day because I think we have enough controversial stories today for one night. So if you guys don't have anything else to add, why don't we move on to the next story? And we're going to stay in the United States and we're going to pivot back to the Doge discussion because our Doge discussion last week was fairly controversial. The video got a lot of views, but the like to dislike ratio was like, 60-40. So it was very controversial. The 60 was in the like direction. So still there was more people that liked the video than disliked the video, but there were still quite a bit of people that disliked the video, probably angry liberals that we all just pissed off permanently. But what are you going to do, right? So why don't we continue the tradition and talk about Doge a little bit more? So the story that with regards to Doge this week is that there's talks of doing what's called a Doge dividend. So the way that it works is that, as explained by the Kobasi letter, the Doge dividend, Elon just said that Doge is considering sending $5,000 of refund checks to U.S. taxpayers. This plan would send 79 million households a total of $400 billion, which is 20% of Doge's projected savings by 2026. So what does this mean? This is in essence how it works. Take 20% of Doge's total savings. If you do that, that's 400 billion, and you divide it by 79 million tax-paying households. So this is whole households. I would imagine that there could be some sort of cutoff as well. Like if you're too rich, then you don't get this Doge dividend if your income is above a certain threshold. So there could be adjustments made as well to kind of maximize the impact and give the money to people who actually need it. I just wanted to kind of bring this up as an idea that's being floated. And Elon said that he has talked to Trump, and Trump is open to this idea of doing this Doge dividend. People are kind of doubting, how much money could Doge really save, right? Are they really going to be able to come up with $400 billion? And even if they do, is that only going to be 20% of their projected savings? Let me just kind of give you an update on how Doge is doing already. So this is a screenshot from the national debt clock. As you can see, Doge has already saved, and I took this screenshot a couple of days ago. So by the time you see this, and by the time, in fact, if you go to the debt clock now, it'll be a different number. It'll be a higher number. The Doge team has already saved American taxpayers $112 billion. It's almost $113 billion as of late February of 2025. So, give them another few months to run. Who knows, right? Like this number is going up every day. So Doge is working. I just think that this dividend it could be a really good idea to kind of drill home the point that Doge is working, and then kind of really maybe improve the image of both Elon Musk and Trump, because I know the Democrats have attacked both Trump and Elon relentlessly because apparently that's all they know how to do at the moment. But if Doge goes through with this dividend check, I think that that's gonna kind of put a knife in the heart of this anti-Elon, anti-Trump argument. At that point, when people actually see the money that Doge is saving, a lot of people will, I think, change their minds or warm up to the idea that this is really a force for good, and reducing spending, reducing waste, especially reducing corruption, is the way to go. But I'm super biased on this topic. I would like to hear maybe some more, I guess, I don't know, left-leaning thoughts. So maybe I'll pass it to Tristan first. and then you can give your thoughts on what do you think of this Doge dividend idea, or do you think that Doge is do you think that Doge is going too far in cutting things, or just what do you think of this situation in general?
Yeah, I will say that I'm just gonna call you out for a quick second and just say you're showing your bias a little bit by saying that Doge works right off the bat, because I think a lot of people would disagree with that sentiment. That's not to say that I'm saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that is definitely you're definitely showing a leaning towards Doge being a benefiter rather than a detractor, if that makes sense. So with regards to the actual questions, if they're planning to send a $5,000 refund checks to U.S. taxpayers, I think when it comes right down to it, Doge seems to be reducing, and again, maybe I don't necessarily have all the details, but Doge seems to be reducing a lot of stuff that is international. With the USAID, they were cutting a bunch of different international programs for aid to different countries, and a lot of that kind of not internal to the US's borders. So I think that maybe from a U.S. taxpayer perspective, as someone who would be living there, you may be very, very pro getting a fat check instead of sitting there and having the country provide aid to other countries where you see no direct benefit. So and on that front, I think that maybe there's a reasonable argument to be made that the U.S. is maybe weakening its international perspectives across the board just by reducing aid and reducing its kind of the perspective of other countries that the U.S. is super great and that's where they want to aspire to be. A lot of immigrants and such are like the top people from other countries are pretty much always looking at the U.S. as like a top place to immigrate to, which has given the U.S. significant economic gains over the years by the fact that they've been able to gather the majority of the world's top talent. So that this may be an area where Doge is going to be acting negatively by reducing kind of that essentially pro-US propaganda. If you had got a lot of US aid, you're more likely to go to the US to immigrate. And again, maybe this is a little bit of speculation on that front. With regards to like some of their other cuts, like with government workers and such, I think that it's likely that there is a significant amount of areas in which there could be efficiencies made through reducing some of the bureaucracy in the government. I'm not familiar enough with the U.S. government exactly to say whether or not they're doing a good job of reducing that bureaucracy with what they're doing or not. But I think that can be a significant benefit to the taxpayer, because if you're paying for bureaucracy that doesn't benefit you, then that's also a negative to the taxpayer, because obviously you're paying directly to that. And then going back to the $5,000 refund checks, I think that would be a significant financial boost to the majority of to the majority of the U.S. people, like U.S. taxpayers, given that we've established in the past that I think I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's like 50% of people are a $500 expense away from going into debt or something crazy like that. So a $5,000 check would go a long way to benefiting people's financial situation and allowing them to, pay off debt or buy stuff, or just honestly, it would be a big boost to the economy in general, because there'd just be so much additional funds just flowing into the economy that were previously maybe not as directly flowing into the economy, if that makes sense. If a lot of this money that's being cut was being sent overseas, then that money would not have been benefiting the economy, even if, the employees who would have been working for the federal government would have been contributing to the economy. So it's kind of like it could be I would say it's probably beneficial to a lot of the U.S. taxpayers to receive that money, particularly since as a saving, it shouldn't cause inflation to the same extent that a rolling up the money printer and handing out everyone $5,000 checks would. But and I think that would be probably good for a lot of U.S. people, U.S. taxpayers. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's quite a significant amount of support for Elon and Trump caused by this, because if you're someone who's living on the edge, walking that line of $500 expense, getting that $5,000 would be a massive benefit for your financial position. Whereas, someone who's got $5 million is literally, they're basically not going to notice it. Right. So yeah, I think it's like, I think that it's tough for me to say specifically if people are going to be significantly better off because of the Doge savings in the long run, because I don't have sufficient data to assess what is being cut, what is the value that was being provided, what is the, and it's also hard to measure, like how do you measure the impact of the Americans providing aid to countries and convincing their top talent to leave the country and move to America? Like, how do you put a dollar figure on that? Because, like, I'm sure there is a dollar figure that could be applied to that if you go down the grapevine enough, but like without really hammering into it, I feel like that gets really difficult to assess. So in the long run, we're kind of just going to have to see what happens with how the way Doge works out, because it could be just a short-term gain at the cost of the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, let me just push back on one thing that you said, because I understand the argument that people have around, Doge cutting this and cutting that, and it's reducing American influence over the world, because a lot of this, like especially the stuff that we talked about with USAID, it was going to help other countries and stuff like that. But in my opinion, is that America's going to be a place where people want to immigrate to anyways, just because of its fundamental human rights, the Constitution, and its business friendliness. I think that is a huge factor where people are allowed to keep the money that they make, because property rights and all this stuff is respected. I think that is a factor that's not changing anytime soon. And I don't think, like, a lot of the stuff that we talked about last week, where it was revealed that USAID was funding like Kenyan pottery classes, like I really think that we could just do without, and like Kenyan people would be just as willing to move to the United States without the pottery classes. So I just don't see a lot of value in many of the things that Doge has cut. And the argument that you're cutting government workers and all this stuff. Well, if they cut a bunch of government workers and there's like I haven't seen any evidence of like social services breaking down. Maybe you can say, oh, you just haven't seen the effect yet. It'll come, but I'm still waiting, right? Like I just think that a lot of efficiencies can be found, and it's just like the money is better given back to the taxpayer because essentially it's like a tax cut, right? When they find savings and then they give it back to the taxpayer. So I think that is a lot more efficient use of the money. So rather than collecting it and then wasting it overseas. But obviously I'm super biased on this. Sunil, I know you've been waiting for a long time and I see you writing stuff down. So I'm sure you have a lot to say about this. So I'm going to pass the mic to you.
I don't think that the fear mongering around the Doge cuts is really connecting with most voters. Like the voters who are being crybabies are people who are always crybabies about Trump. So I just don't think it's actually making a difference. Like nobody gives a shit what the Democrats have to say about most things at this point in time. They've already marginalized themselves into getting one of the worst defeats in modern history. So like there just isn't anything significant being cut. US aid, a lot of people want to talk about it being this amazing charitable thing that America does, but it is very much a modern form of imperialism. Like a lot of the programs within US aid are tied to US intelligence and US Defense Department, and I'm sure there was good things being funded, but I don't think America's influence is going to be significantly impacted because they get rid of all these elitist pet projects that are basically funneling money into family networks and stuff. And that's really what I believe US aid was being used for. I think it was a lot of corruption. I said last week, it's a lot of people deny that it's corruption because it is a legalized form of corruption. But that's what happens when big government budgets get bloated. You get a lot of people who are able to extract value from government money by just, I don't know, like there's a lot of contractors who make a lot of money off the government by not providing a lot of value. So there's a lot of ways you can extract value here. I think it's also important to actually analyze what America First truly means. And that does mean America does have to pull back from a lot of its commitments around the world that have a very negative impact on individuals who are usually in the working class. Like, for example, America's commitments have led it to be the reserve currency in the world, which is effectively like put like a Dutch disease type pressure on America's working class and America's industrial capacity. So I think people really understand how much cost America's, like middle America faces when it comes to like America maintaining this like imperialistic system around the world where they run everything. Like it actually is something that bears a lot of cost for America. So if America was gonna really truly go America first, it does mean that they have to pull back from a lot of these kinds of commitments. And it does mean that America essentially has to gut their federal government, because a lot of people will talk about government programs and they'll just get emotional about them and talk about them for the, oh, like, well, this is named like the child welfare bill, and then they'll get emotional about the name of the program, but not actually do the due diligence to see if that program's actually moving the needle. I think it's more likely that the bloated federal governments of the Western world are where most of the waste is, and not at the state or provincial level governments where they actually have a direct relationship with the voters, while federal governments kind of get to sit on top of the system and extract whatever value they have, mess with money supply, whatever they're doing. So I just don't think that people really understand the implications of America First and what that really means for these programs in America, and how the federal government allocates resources on behalf of the people. That this is going to be like a major shift. In terms of like Doge and the $5,000 check, I won't get too into the details of how much money is going to get sent to households, because it seems like the Trump administration is already kind of walking back the exact figures. But a lot of people are just going to attack it for being a political gimmick. some people will even argue that if you're going to save money, you should just lower the deficit rather than pay a big stimulus. It's not necessarily clear if America needs a stimulus or not. I don't want to get too into that aspect of it. Generally, I think that like if you are if you want to stimulate the economy, the most market efficient way to do it is to just hand out checks to your citizens. I think that a lot of people are already arguing this is inflationary. Like a lot of Bitcoiners are arguing that. I don't think they get that. Like if the stimulus is funded through like essentially cutting jobs in the government and cutting money out of the government, if it's funded through savings, it's not inflationary. There's no M2 money inflation, at least, so I don't anticipate a lot of inflation. It's also like $5,000 where every single American gets to spend that where they want. It's probably not going to flow to the same places. It's going to be very diverse how money is going to spend. So I just don't see much of an inflationary impact here, especially if they actually are able to like bend the curve on spending. I also think that there's like again, the Democrats have just put the Democrat constant complaining and their like fear mongering has put themselves in a really bad political position, because if the Trump administration is able to do like a one-time $5,000 check to households or something along those lines to households, they can really change the political culture where we've like lived in like a 15-year, 20-year political culture where debt financing of stimulus has been kind of like the culture of political parties on both the right and the left in the Western world. I actually think that if you actually change the political culture suddenly to where you convince the American public to fire federal public servants, and there's going to be an immediate financial benefit to citizens. I don't mean to be mean about it, like talking about firing people, but if that is actually the political move the Trump administration makes, then firing public servants and lowering expenditure at the federal level is probably going to become an even more popular policy, which will allow Congress to actually enact more budget cutbacks where DOGE doesn't actually have executive authority to do so. Or, I mean, DOGE doesn't have any executive authority, but on the recommendation of DOGE, there's a lot that Trump can do as the executive, but there's a lot he can't do. But if you if you actually shift the political culture of America very suddenly, where like people get a $5,000 benefit, that's going to be really bad for the Democrats who are fear mongering around DOGE. I think that the Democrats did come out in the early days of talking about DOGE and actually kind of supported it, and then very quickly turned back on those talking points. So there's like some kind of external pressures that are really making the Democrats fall in line. I'm not exactly sure exactly what that is, but I think that the Democrat talking points are one where the voters are mostly ignoring it. The voters that are pissed off are the ones who are going to get pissed off anyways. There's a lot of people who are pissed off who are people who extract value from governments. And I just think that this like culture change of like actually hitting budget deficits really hard is something that's probably going to spread across the Western world. I think that if you get like a popular $5,000 dividend, I think that a lot of people around the Western world are probably going to start demanding that their governments do the same thing.
To be honest, here in Ontario, we're having an election, and Doug Ford, who's the premier of Ontario, is actually trying something similar to the DOGE dividend, except instead of 5,000 US dollars, he's giving 200 Canadian dollars to everyone. So quite a bit smaller, and he's doing it right before an election. So it seems very obvious that he's trying to buy votes. But I guess the idea is good, that he should be returning taxpayer money that the government saved, if it is actually saved, back to the taxpayer as much as possible. But yeah, I mean, I can definitely see your point, Sunil, about this kind of idea spreading to other countries all over the world, especially, liberal Western democracies. I think that is a trend that is happening. And it's really, to your point, Sunil, I won't speak too much on this because we got to move on for the sake of time. But one last point that to what you said earlier, Sunil, it is really bizarre that the Democrats are so against it. It just seems like whatever Trump says or whatever Elon says at this point, that they're just going to be automatically against no matter if it's a good idea or a bad idea, because the thing for Doge, like this idea of government using, or the executive, i.e. the president or the president's administration, using the executive power to save without going through Congress. That's kind of the thing that the Democrats are the most mad about. How could Trump do this? How could Elon do this? But this idea was actually first proposed by, I think, Bill Clinton, and then Obama mentioned it too. So Obama wanted to do some savings, and Congress at the time, I think that the Republicans controlled one of the either House or Senate, and like he had trouble passing stuff through Congress because it's like he doesn't have full control over it. So Obama was just like, oh, if Congress won't do it, then we're spending too much money. I'm just going to use the executive power to cut. And he didn't like fully commit to it. Like he didn't go through with it. And maybe he did cut a few things, but he didn't do it nearly on the scale that Trump is doing it with Doge. But this whole idea that, Trump is like abusing the executive branch, and he's, causing a constitutional crisis, like this stuff, it's not like a totally novel idea. Like Obama literally did the exact same thing, or said the exact same thing. But Sunil, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, like, anybody who like is actually going to argue that the government expenditure isn't like grossly bloated in the United States, but really across most of the world at this point in time, is like they're full of crap at this point. Like I don't value anybody's judgment who actually is seriously calling this a constitutional crisis, or seriously talking about continuing to have like interest rate expenses like grow faster than GDP. Like this is not a formula for success for any country in the world. And anybody who's like seriously arguing that like the status quo should continue is full of shit. You can blurt that out if you need to, but yeah, that's kind of what I think.
And Tristan, I know you might have disagreed with a few of the things that we mentioned in this story, but for the sake of time, let's move on to the next story where you'll have big disagreements probably with what my opinion is, or maybe not, like we'll see. But this topic, I think we had a discussion about this a little bit earlier this week privately in our DMs, but we were talking about this whole debate on return to office. So part of this, I actually forgot to include this part in the docket too, but part of this was sparked by Jamie Dimon, who is the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, who had a conversation that was recorded and leaked to the press. I don't know if it was intentionally leaked or it was accidentally leaked, but he basically like went on a rant, like a very angry rant about how like he wants everybody to return to the office, like working from home is dumb, and like he goes to work every day in the office, and he's complaining that nobody's there, and he has like a team of 100 where he doesn't know what anybody's doing, and there's no teamwork, there's no interaction. So he basically went on like a huge rant about how he does not like work from home at all, and he wants everybody to return to work because in his opinion that's what drives like a company to maximum efficiency, to the best teamwork possible, and all this stuff. And I'll save my opinions for the end, but I just also found this story on Fox News where Fox News was saying how Elon, Doge, and this was something that Vivek Ramaswamy also talked a lot about. And this was before Vivek was like, kicked out of Doge, or he left on his own. We don't know. But even before he was involved in Doge and then became uninvolved, like even before Vivek was talking about how returning to office is something that's truly needed. And according to this Fox News report, most federal workers have never returned to the office post-COVID. So how many federal employees are working in the office today? By one estimate, it may be just about 1%. And I don't know if it's actually 1%, but according to Elon, there's many office buildings that are just completely empty, that, you know, like federal government office buildings that that taxpayers are paying for, that are just completely empty because, you know, everyone's working from home and everyone's you know, they're not required to come to the office. So Elon is also of the opinion that we need people to come to the office, because that's, like, you know, he's on the Jamie Dimon side of the argument in this case, where he's arguing for everybody to return to office, and he's promising that DOGE will look into it and get people to return to office. So here's the debate, right? And I also, before we get into that, actually, this SpongeBob, the Squidward meme, you know, remote work started in 2020, died in 2024. In 2025, because you know, Trump and Doge and all this stuff, they're pushing everybody to come back, and this is like a renaissance for return to work, if you're for return to office work, if you're all for that. But yeah, anyway, so here's the debate, right? So I know we have a lot of opinions, and, you know, people here, we have been working, like, or at least I have been working remotely, so I might be slightly biased in that sense, where I am an employee who had the benefit of remote work for a long time. Ever since 2020, I've pretty much always had a job that was fully remote. And I don't know about you guys, but I think, Tristan, you have a remote job as well, right? So, you know, what are the kind of like benefits, pros and cons? What do you think about this whole push for return to office? And do you think that, you know, if you're for one side, can you also maybe try to argue the other side? Because personally, I'm actually kind of conflicted on this, but I'll save my opinions for later. Can you argue for the other side, steel man the other side as well? Don't just say like my side wins and the other side sucks, because I can see there's kind of two sides to this argument as well. Are you for this push to return to the office, or do you think that this push goes too far and is dumb? What are your just kind of opinions on this whole return to office debate? Tristan, I'll pass it to you first.
Return to office. It's an interesting question, because for the last however many, you know, decades of working, everyone went to an office, they signed off, they went into the office at 9, they signed off at 5, and, you know, that was the life. You went into the office, you left the office, you commuted downtown. All of our public transit is designed to go downtown so that you could go to your office downtown, etc. And, you know, there's a lot of businesses that rely on people, office workers, spending money in the vicinity of their offices, right? So I can understand from an economic perspective why a nation may be more inclined to encourage people to return to the office in general. And honestly, as from, you know, in an employer's perspective, I can understand why some industries will really benefit from having workers in office, specifically startups and that kind of thing, where I think there must be a more significant degree of teamwork and collaboration at a much closer level than in other roles. That being said, I also think that there's been significant push to bring everyone back to the office. And I think that there are a lot of roles that are perfectly capable of being done from home. I think that also in a lot of instances, people have, particularly during the pandemic, equipped themselves with superior equipment than what is currently in their office for them to use. Like, I know, for example, like the monitors that I use for my job are significantly superior to the monitors that are available if I go into the office, which means that if I were to work in the office, my output would be lower, because I would have to I would have more I'd be able to see less of what I'm trying to do at a time, because I have high resolution monitors where I can see multiple different things all at once, which improves my productivity. So anyway, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the case for everyone. And I'm just saying that is one aspect. But I don't think that. I think there's been a big push for a lot of people to return to the office when they don't actually get any value from returning to the office, and in fact are likely to have less output than after returning to the office. And I don't think that's everyone, but I think that, from a worker perspective, if someone who is working from home returns to a commuting 9 to 5, they may be, they're probably less likely to respond to emails and stuff outside of working hours. And I know for a fact that, like, some people I've heard from who have returned to office before, they would have their laptops at home. If they needed to jump on a call earlier in the morning or in late evening, they'd already had their laptops at home. But now with return to the office, they leave their stuff at the office. So they have it from 9 and they have it till 5. So no one is getting on those calls. So in fact, in some instances, the outputs for workers will be reduced. And I'm not saying that that's going to be the case for everyone. There are some people who I'm sure are not doing as much work because they're working from home without the direct hand-holding of a manager being able to walk by and see what you're doing. But I think in the grand scheme of things, the majority of people who are working from home are working. And I think that's the big issue that they kind of aren't really focusing on. It seems to me that a lot of the generations that spent the majority of their lives working in the office seem like they want that office experience that they had growing up, where you'd run into people in the office, have those coffee chats, go on those coffee runs, build connections, build friends, and all that in the office. And they're frustrated that they can't get that to the same extent because everyone's virtual. And I think on that front, there's probably less connections being made from work from home compared to in the office. But I don't think that, I think that's something that the employee themselves can manage rather than the leadership determining that they should all return to the office. And I think that they also are overstating how much work gets done in the office, because I think that there was a significant amount of time that is being spent by office workers where they are, having those coffee chats, going for coffee runs, and, time just goes by, like, I don't think that, or the going out for lunches and stuff. Like, I don't think that it's directly clear to me that there's going to be a significant amount more actual output coming from having everyone go back in the office, and then, making that determination based on the roles, if that makes sense. I think I think they seem to be very wide sweeping with their return to office, when a lot of people, don't really need to be in the office to get their work done. If you're someone who basically never interacts with anyone at the office, why are you going into the office? What value are you providing by spending that time to commute? That you may now feel like the employee may now feel less inclined to hop on calls when they normally would have, because they could, balance their day a little bit better due to working from home. They may be less willing to hop on like early morning or late evening calls or something to that effect. So I just think it's something where they're trying to kind of ramp it up really aggressively where with return to office and I think that I think they're kind of just going a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too everyone needs to return to office. And I think one other area that I think I haven't touched on is that I think there's been a significant boost to alternative cities' economies by like remote workers. So, for example, like someone who worked in Toronto and then moved to London to remote work, like London, Ontario. That is now someone who is directly contributing to the London economy by, spending their larger Toronto salary in London that would not be occurring if there was not that option for them to work from home, because they would have had to be in Toronto to be in commuting distance of their office. So I think that there are economic benefits to remote work that maybe isn't necessarily being considered as a significant benefit. And yeah, I think there's just a significant amount of time wasting, just wasted hours of commuting back and forth that also represents a cost to employees, as well as it's just overall just like a worse working environment for an employee to be having to commute, because they now have to ensure that they can commute at a reasonable amount of time, which forces them to make decisions that they may not otherwise have made with regards to where they live and how much they're having to spend to facilitate that. So again, it's just, and maybe from the company's perspective, who gives a shit? But I still think that is something that would potentially determine someone who is an otherwise great candidate. It may deter them from choosing a company that does not allow them to have remote work, or at the very least, hybrid work, that would deter them from taking a job and thus have that company lose out on that worker's value. So it's just I think they've just gone a little bit too hard, too fast. It's maybe should have been more of a slower process, but I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts in general.
Yeah, I think my views on it, I don't have any real contrary views on it, but I think that, like, it's obvious that there's some workplaces that it's more appropriate for than others. Like, I remember seeing a lot of like people arguing online when like Apple and like Tesla forced their workers back, and like 99% of the people who are arguing don't even work at Apple or Tesla. So I think that it's just like one of those things that I understand. Like, it's obvious why anybody would be emotional about it. Because like it's a great benefit to have. I thought work from home was awesome when they first introduced it. But it's like, in the overall debate, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are workplaces that aren't going to do it, and they're high performance places, or they're engineering shops or whatever, and they want a certain, or startups or whatever, they want a certain team dynamic to get built. I think that it's also one of those things where it's like used as a culling tactic for a lot of workplaces. So I know that was kind of that is kind of happening in the Canadian government. I'm in touch with a lot of public servants, and just reading what was on the news. They try to do twice a week, then they they ramped it up to 4 to 5 times a week in some places. And I think that they're doing it because it's like an easy way to eliminate jobs potentially, which is kind of mean and a crude way of handling it, but that's how companies and workplaces do it sometimes. So I think you're going to get a lot of this kind of crude decisions that force people back to the office. But overall, there's actually tons of jobs, especially in the office world, where it's very appropriate. Work from home is actually really appropriate, especially if it's like a hybrid system. The I agree with Tristan that like there's a lot of like productivity benefits that companies get that they're probably not thinking about right now. It's also like a recruitment thing. Like if your competitors are offering work from home and you're not, like you might lose your good staff to that kind of thing. So I think that the work-life balance benefits and stuff are hard to like. It's hard to like do the math on the benefits of that, but I think the companies are gonna have a like really rough time long term putting the toothpaste back in the tube type thing. With this, I don't think work from home is gonna go away. Yeah, like the COVID era, work from home, where like every single person was working from home for several months at a time for 5 days a week is probably not feasible for a lot of companies, but the hybrid work from home is probably here to stay. So I think that any like major attempts to get rid of it, a lot of workplaces are going to find that it doesn't work out so well for them. There's going to be a lot of like things that happen that they don't anticipate. Like for example, workers moving to competitor companies that offer the benefit, and yeah, that's kind of what I think about it. I mean, I kind of understand both sides of the argument, but I don't think this is going away. Like I just don't think it's going to go away. I think that work from home's here forever, and there's going to be some places that are more hybrid than others.
Yeah, I think it's surprising that I think we actually all kind of agree in principle on like many of the things that you two just mentioned. I think, yeah, obviously I feel like Tristan, you're coming from the more, pro work from home side, whereas I'm a little bit more in between. Whereas like obviously as I said earlier, I work from home now, and I'm a fan of working from home, but I can maybe see a little bit more of like where Elon and Doge are coming from, where you got to keep in mind that Elon is known for, being the startup CEO, driving innovation and all that stuff. So he's obviously super biased in this, where for his companies like Tesla and SpaceX, a lot of the stuff that SpaceX does, it's like, if you're designing a physical rocket somewhere, you can't like really maybe you can work from home when you're designing like the blueprints and stuff, but like, a lot of this stuff, if you're assembling a rocket or something, then there's no way to work from home for that. You got to be there, right? So I think Elon is super biased in this perspective, where he's trying to get Doge to run the government the same way that he runs Tesla and SpaceX, and that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way. And he's probably going to be at least mildly successful in that, where like, he's really good at pushing people. But yeah, I get that maybe it doesn't make sense in every single scenario. However, I do also see it a little bit from like the, Doge and Elon Musk, Jamie Dimon's perspective, where, face it, like if you're working remotely, how many times during the workday that you've like taken out the garbage or vacuumed your floor or like went down to the kitchen and like, made a meal when you were like not on your assigned lunchtime? Like we've probably all done those things before if you've ever worked remotely, right? So that's like, people don't like to admit it, but that kind of stuff just happens all the time for working from home. And I'm not saying that it's like wrong or it's like unethical or anything like that. Everybody does it, as I said. But it's just from the employer's perspective, I can definitely see why they would be against that. And I get your point earlier that you made, Tristan, where you're like, okay, well, you're not going to be sitting at your desk focused on your computer screen 24/7 when you're in the office either, right? Like you're going to go out for like coffee runs and stuff. But I would argue that part is like, if most people don't go on coffee runs by themselves, maybe some people do, but if you're going on like lunches with coworkers and going on coffee runs with coworkers, that is part of team building as well. So yes, you're not like doing your work at your desk, but at the same time, I would argue that maybe team building, like in face-to-face team building, is part of the work, and your employer, your boss, will most likely be more kind of okay with that compared to, like, I don't know, you taking out the garbage when you're working from home, right? Like they would rather you go out for a coffee with your coworker than taking out the garbage while you're at home. Although both tasks, you're not doing work related things while you're doing it, but it's just one is team building and one is not. So yeah, I can definitely see like both perspectives. And I think that the way I envision the future is probably there are going to be some jobs where it actually does make sense to be work from home, either fully work from home 5 days a week, or 2 to 3 days a week or something like that. And then there's going to be a lot of jobs where it doesn't make sense to work from home. So it just depends on the specific companies, very situational. What Elon is doing with Doge and forcing people to come back to work, I think that's just, as Sunil, you said, it's like a tactic, right, to call out like the people that are not fully committed. And I just think that's like, that is part of the tactic, right, where Elon's trying to downsize the government. And I think that is going to be successful because a lot of people are going to be like, oh, I'm not going to come to office. I'd rather quit, right? So yeah, that's basically all my thoughts on this. Surprisingly, we actually arrived at a pretty good consensus, I feel like, on that story. Now, for the sake of time, let's move on to our maybe second last story of the day. So let's move back to the homeland, Canada, north of the border, where things are chaotic as always, no less chaotic than America, where we actually had a different story, but I had to replace that story with this story because it just broke right before the show started, where, as you guys know, the Liberal Party is running a leadership race because Trudeau resigned and they got to replace him. And in this leadership race, we just got the news that Ruby Dhalla has been kicked out of the leadership race. So if you don't know who Ruby Dhalla is, she was a former MP from, I think she's from like Mississauga or something, or like near Toronto, like region. And yeah, she was a former MP who's running to be the leader of the Liberal Party. And remember, whoever wins the Liberal leadership race automatically becomes prime minister until the next election, whenever that will be, right? So the results will come out on March 9th. And if you're a registered Liberal, you can verify your identity, and next week you're going to be able to start voting for the next prime minister, basically. But until then, like, there's things that has to happen. There's debates, and then there's like, funding requirements that each candidate has to hit, and Ruby Dhalla has hit all of the funding requirements. But the Liberal Party, apparently they held a meeting where they decided that she's not qualified because of reasons we'll talk about. So the reasons why she was disqualified was because apparently she faced 12 allegations of accepting donations from a corporation in the form of payments to campaign staff. And this is something that is not allowed under the Liberal Party leadership race rules. And she was also accused of failing to disclose the involvement of a non-Canadian citizen in her campaign, which the party alleges would amount to foreign interference if it happened during an election period. So there's stuff about, Ruby Dhalla's, like, she's of Indian ancestry. And, I think it was mentioned that she personally knows the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. And Modi featured her in like a promotional video or something. I didn't read too much into it, but apparently there's some like connection to Modi. And that's and Canada and India are not on the best terms right now because of, unrelated reasons, but which we won't get into. But it's just, there's a lot of pushback against the potential for foreign interference, especially if it's from like India and all that stuff. So yeah, basically this is pretty disappointing news to me. I don't know about for you guys, but full disclosure, I register as a Liberal, even though my views are probably at this point not very aligned with the Liberal Party, but I registered as a Liberal because, again, whoever wins this race becomes the Prime Minister of Canada automatically, even if it's only for a few weeks, right? So this is a race that's super important, in my opinion. And I wanted to cast my ballot for Ruby Dhalla. And I actually wanted to cast my ballot for Chandra Arya. If you remember, we talked about him, but then he was disqualified as well. And now Ruby Dhalla has been disqualified also. So this news was really disappointing. And I found this tweet by Sharia Tees, who's political analyst here in Canada. And he's basically saying that, hey, they kicked out every single ethnic minority candidate, right? So there are no people of color left in the race for the Liberal leader after they kicked out Ruby Dhalla. So they kicked out every single ethnic minority candidate. Can you imagine the reaction if it was done by the Conservatives? Right. So again, this is something that I notice as well, where it seems like the left leaning parties, or just the left in general, is able to get away with a lot of this stuff, where the Liberal Party, they've been like, promoting DEI and all this stuff, but then Ruby Dhalla was actually running on a platform of anti-DEI, and so was Chandra Arya. And it's interesting that the people of color are running against DEI, and then they also kicked out all the people of color for various reasons, right? They say they kicked out Chandra Arya for lack of French, and then now they're kicking out Ruby Dhalla for potential for foreign interference and all this stuff. Really vague kind of accusations. And they're accusations, by the way. There's like none of this has been proven in court or anything. So yeah, it's just under what I would say suspicious reasons and vague reasons. So yeah, it's just a little icky to me. But maybe I'll save my opinions for a little bit later. I want to hear what you guys have to say first. But before that, let me just read you a statement by Ruby Dhalla herself, who posted on X after it was disclosed that she was going to be kicked out. So she said, "In my campaign, there have been thousands of volunteers from all over Canada who have wanted to be part of history of having the first woman of color as Canada's next prime minister and the leader of the Liberal Party. I will not allow my campaign to be tarred with baseless allegations of foreign interference because of my Indian heritage and being the daughter of an immigrant. These types of comments are a direct attack on all immigrants, which I would not allow. Hashtag Ruby for PM." So, she's denying these accusations, and she's just basically saying it's all ridiculous. But she's probably not going to change the mind of the Liberal leadership. So, what are you going to do, right? So that's kind of the story that broke right before when we started this podcast. I wanted to hear what you guys' thoughts are. Do you guys think that this is kind of why do you think they kicked out Ruby Dhalla? Do you think that they're like afraid of her because she's kind of the only one that was willing to openly go against Mark Carney, who's kind of the favorite to win right now? And do you think this is maybe even like racially motivated, as she was implying, right? Like herself, that like she's being targeted because of her Indian heritage? Or do you think that she's just, overblowing this because she's angry that she got kicked out? So, lots of angles you can go at this. So I leave the question open. Just your thoughts on this story in general.
I think that it's very clear from my perspective that they have selected their one to win, Mark Carney, and that's it. And they need to remove as much alternatives as possible to ensure that Mark Carney gets his coronation, whether or not he would have gotten it if alternatives had been available or not. I think it's very clear to me that the party has spoken, and they are not willing to risk the registered liberals surprising them and selecting not their candidate of choice. And by they, I mean the Liberal Party itself. So I think that Ruby just got caught in the crossfire, honestly, because like I think it's pretty clear that Freeland is not going to beat Mark Carney, right? I don't think anyone is actually expecting that. Whereas Ruby was maybe more of a upset candidate, where it's like we don't really know who the heck she is to the extent that we know Freeland and Mark Carney now. So choose maybe a little bit more of a alternative that people may have chosen over their coronated king, Mark Carney. So instead of running the risk of her winning, they just found a reason to disqualify her. That's kind of the vibe I get. And I mean, maybe I'm not saying there's a definitive proof that she didn't do anything wrong, because I'm not I don't know exactly all the details on these the allegations, the donations, whatever. But I feel like I feel like it's a little convenient, if that makes sense, to that they happen to find some shit on her that they could use, rather than just letting it play out, right? I feel like it's a little too convenient, especially after they already disqualified Andy remembers his name, but I don't.
Chandra Arya.
Yeah. Since they already disqualified him for essentially a BS reason. I understand, like, French is important, but at the end of the day, does his ability to speak French make him a good leader or a bad leader? Not like it doesn't really say anything about his leadership. And maybe his unwillingness to learn it might have spoken to him being someone that wouldn't have been chosen. But at the end of the day, they didn't even let him try, right? They just removed him. I hope he didn't have to pay the fee and then get disqualified after they took the fee, because I'm pretty sure Ruby paid the fee and they just are going to keep the money. Wow, thanks for that money, Ruby, in those donations to the party that you're then not allowed to actually run in, because I don't know if it's necessarily necessarily a race thing. I think it's more so they've already realized that Mark Carney is the best bet that they have to win the election, and they just decided they can't risk anyone else. At least that's my perspective. I maybe there's more to this that I'm unaware, but I think it's more so that they've decided that Mark Carney needs to win, and they're now making sure he wins, if that makes sense. That's kind of my take on it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole coronation argument is pretty clear at this point. That like they're coronating Mark Carney as their leader. A lot of the sitting MPs endorsed him. I guess they see him as like a WEF friendly, like WEF friendly candidates, because like the Liberals are full of those kinds of candidates, like Chrystia Freeland and Justin and these young global leader type people, but they probably want to put a fresh face on it. So it just makes sense. They're coordinating their leader and they don't want anybody to really challenge him. But I also think there's like other aspects to this that are somewhat troubling and somewhat suspicious. One thing being that, like, I think Ruby Dahlia and Chandra Arya, and I think that a lot of this is cultural. They're the kinds of progressives that kind of reject that international leftist doctrine that people like Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney and the Joe Bidens of the world are very much proponents of. They're actually much more focused on like productivity and those kinds of things, and a lot less focused on carbon taxes and a lot of these international issues that Canada has kind of dived in during the Trudeau administration. So I think that it's a big risk to put somebody on a debate stage that really challenges these ideals. There's other issues here. I think that the whole line about foreign interference is being weaponized against people of color in Canada. Because I think that I don't believe that Ruby Dahlia and Chandra Arya are working for the Modi government. So I actually do think it's not like full on racist, but it's like, wow, that's like, that really makes people like me feel unwelcome in this country. And I think that they would probably use that line.
Also, imagine if the conservatives did that and how
Oh
mad
yeah.
people would be, right?
Oh, they'd call them racist. They would use all the labels and the R words. So I think that, like you just said, the liberals would never let the conservatives get away with this. And I don't think the conservatives would have the balls to remove a person of color from their leadership campaign. So I think that it's actually very problematic that they're weaponizing the language of foreign interference against people who, like Ruby, was born in this country, but because of the color of her skin and her cultural background, she has to have these weaponized against her now. That's a problem. And I think the liberals are going to probably dive in deeper using that language. And I think it's going to push people like me who have for their whole lives been very progressive voters. And I switched before this Ruby situation, but like it's going to push more people like me away from the political left in Canada, because the political left are really showing their true colors, that their DEI and their diversity is all performative. They don't give a shit about people like me, and they don't want people like me running their party. And that's the truth. And I'll get a little bit more controversial about it. Like a lot of like the DNA of the Liberal Party is centered in Quebec, in like the Montreal region. Like people will accuse the Liberals of being Laurentian elites or whatever you want to say, whatever the terminology is. But a lot of the intellectual backing of the Liberal Party comes from that region of the country. There's a lot of French Canadian progressives that are in the Liberal caucus. And the one thing that's like unique about French Canadian progressives compared to the rest of the country is they happen to be arguably the most xenophobic people in the country. So I think there's a big problem with what would happen if the Liberal government actually nominated a brown person to be the leader of their country. I do not believe that the province of Quebec would for a second consider voting for a brown person to be leader of the country. I think that's also true for people of many different ethnic backgrounds. I think it's a very xenophobic, insular place that does openly hate, at times, not hate, but are resentful, or the way they talk about people of color is actually mostly insulting. And I think that the Liberal leadership doesn't want to deal with this situation where a brown person who doesn't speak French would actually lead this party, because they would destroy their coalition. They wouldn't win a seat in Quebec.
Yeah, and also just a couple of observations that I made maybe in a few episodes ago when we first talked about Chandra Arya, that I'll just reiterate now for people who didn't watch that episode. It's just funny to me how it's just the people of color are the ones that are pushing back against DEI the most, right? So out of this race, we've seen Ruby Dahlia and Chandra Arya, the two main people of color that threw their hat in the ring, that are the most anti-DEI candidates out of all the candidates that are running. And even if the Liberal Party, if they say that they're going to die on this DEI hill, and they're so like committed to the DEI cause, well, they just pushed out all the people of color from their race. So like, are they even really for DEI, right? So it's kind of a little bit of a hypocrisy going on at the Liberal Party leadership as well. So it's just funny to me how like this whole DEI thing has gone completely twisted, and I do feel like the Liberals have just become another version of the U.S. Democrats. So if you guys recall back in 2020, after like such a resounding defeats at the hands of Donald Trump in 2016, the Democrats, they went back and then they reevaluated stuff. In reality, they didn't change anything. It was still the same old party that lost the 2016 election that just, tried again in 2020. And they won only because of, arguably, this is my opinion, but they only won because of COVID, where it, threw a big shock. Otherwise, if it wasn't for COVID, I believe Trump would have won in 2020. But even before the general election, the way that they did the primaries, where it's the exact same thing that's happening now in Canada with Mark Carney, the Democrats did in 2020 with Joe Biden, right? So Joe Biden came in and he was the establishment favorite, and then he was, doing well in the polls, but there was one challenger called Bernie Sanders that was really catching up to him in the polls, and at one point threatened to, I think at one point Sanders was polling even higher than Biden. And then the Democratic establishment, they're like, we can't have that. Bernie is like, he's an independent, technically. He's an independent senator. So he's not even officially part of the Democratic Party in the Senate. So it's like, he's an outsider, right? So we can't have an outsider. We got to support our establishment favorite. So they got all the, other people that are polling relatively well, but not as well as Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden. They got them to drop out and then endorse Biden. And then Biden started soaring in the polls, right? And, even back in 2016, it was even worse in 2016 because they had super delegates back then where like it was just all Democratic establishment that had a disproportionate amount of votes, and they overwhelmingly went to Hillary Clinton, right? So they did it twice. They did it once in 2016 and once in 2020. And even in 2024, it's like, nobody, they try to crush all the like people that are from within the Democratic Party that try to challenge Biden. So like there's a guy named Dean Phillips, who's a congressman from Minnesota, who tried to, who raised the alarm bells from within the Democratic Party that, hey, maybe Biden is too old. Maybe he's not all there. Maybe he's not good enough to run for another term. And then they totally, shut him out and try to railroad him, basically. And you can read about all that story. And he was talking about it in the All In podcast, actually. So when he was running for the Democratic nomination, he talked about all this when he was still running. But anyways, that's besides the point. So I'm seeing the whole kind of Democratic playbook being just kind of grabbed page by page, exact copy and paste, and put into the Liberal Party playbook. And yeah, I hope it doesn't work, but who knows? Maybe Canadians are more left-leaning than Americans in general. So, in this case, unfortunately, I think the Liberal Party is what's called the natural governing party. Now, I don't know if how accurate that statement is, but I've heard people say that because Canada's, if you had to choose left or right, Canada usually chooses left, all things, else being equal. But yeah, I mean, this Democrat playbook that's being used by the Liberals in Canada, I hope it doesn't work. I don't think it's going to work, but who knows? Maybe, right? Like they're basically going to do the same thing and coronate Mark Carney the same way that Biden and Hillary Clinton was coronated. And it's just really sad to see. I don't know what else to say. It's just the state of affairs in Canada right now. Before we move on to our final story, is there anything else you would like to add on this story?
Yeah, I mean, what you said about like how the tactics that the Liberals are using with the Democratic Party, I guess the way I would phrase that is that the Democratic Party has spent the entire Obama years trying to avoid any kind of organic populist movement from rising in their party, which is probably because they're protecting special interests that don't want an organic political movement to rise through the Democratic Party. It's very much a top-down movement where like their policies are being made by the large institutional class, professor class. It's not a grassroots movement anymore. It's very corporatist, And I think that's the same with the liberals. And you can see that they're making a conceited effort to ensure that there isn't an organic grassroots political movement rising through the Liberal Party. And I mean, they shouldn't be too surprised that they can't come up with issues to connect with the voters anymore. Like, this is why so many working class kitchen table voters are switching to conservative parties across the Western world, because they don't feel like progressive parties are really focused on their interests.
And just one final segment to today's show, and then we'll call it an evening. This is not really a story, but something that I just wanted to kind of discuss with you guys, because I think, Tristan, you were the one that brought it up in a group chat sometime earlier this week or last week, where it's nice to ask these type of questions, right? So regarding this show, Zillennial Money, is it a conservative podcast, or like, are we being the new Alex Jones? Are we like the new alt-right, or are we like, where are we on the political spectrum? Are we being sensible? Because I know like people will probably classify us as a conservative podcast, but I just want to bring up this idea of what's called the Overton window, right? So if you guys don't know what that is, Joseph Overton, he was a political analyst, political scientist, who came up with this idea that there's something called the Overton window, which is this kind of box of policies that are, acceptable to the vast majority of people. And this box is not always in the same spot if you plot it between, the left and the right. Sometimes it's more on the right, sometimes it's more on the left. But everyone kind of like agrees that this kind of policies that are in this box are acceptable. And if you stray too far away from the box, then it goes from, acceptable to radical to unthinkable, right? So, for example, like, I don't know, all right, like fascism or just communism and stuff like that are probably on, either end of this. But I feel like, so for me, I grew up being a progressive, right? And I think I could speak for both of you here as well, where, from our upbringings, we tend to stray on the progressive side, all things considered. However, if I were to classify myself in terms of like, the political spectrum, I would say that I'm probably center right at this point. And I've struggled with this for a long time because, for a long time I was in denial. I'm like, I'm not a conservative. What are you talking about? I'm a progressive, right? But then what I feel like happened was the Overton window over the past, I don't know, 10 years or so, ever since, like the Obama years, I would say, till now, it's been shifting left consistently. Whereas, the things that were considered center left is now being considered center or center right. And then the Overton window just kept on going to the left, where there's some policies, and you see this in both Canada and the United States. But in the United States, you see a lot of these, what I would consider alt-left positions, which have become socially acceptable. So, for example, like the whole biological males and sports thing, I think that's something that like a lot of people can agree on, that's like, it's not like we're trying to be against trans people. It's just from a issue of fairness, right? If you're born a male, you're exposed to testosterone, and you have more muscle mass, you have, you're just faster and you're better and you're stronger than your biological female opponents, right? So we've seen stories where somebody was born a male, biological male, and then they competed in competitions with other biological males when they were younger, and then they placed 30th place or something really low, and then they decide to transition to a female, and then all of a sudden they start winning first place when they're competing against biological females, right? So this type of stuff, I think if you were to ask people 10 years ago, everyone, or not everyone, but most people would say that, yeah, we probably shouldn't have that. But I feel like the Overton window has shifted so far to the left where there is a significant amount of people that are like, yeah, like if you're trans, then even if you were born a male, even if you have a biological advantage, we should let you compete in female sports. And I don't agree with that, right? And I've seen just on that specific topic, I saw a video today actually on with Trump, and he was speaking to a room full of governors, and the governor of Maine is resisting his attempts to ban biological males from female sports, and then they're like, it was a really tense exchange. Like the governor of Maine literally was like, I'm gonna sue you, like see you in court, right? Like it got to that point. I'm like, how do we get to that point, right, where I feel like the Overton window is so far to the left, where I feel like you have all these like radical leftist ideology that's becoming more and more acceptable, whereas positions that were kind of in the middle or maybe even slightly center left are now center right. I'm super biased on this. Obviously, feel free to disagree with anything I said, but this is just my opinion. So I'm curious to hear what you guys have to think. Are we a conservative? Are we a cringy conservative podcast, or are we being sensible? And where would you place yourself on the political spectrum if you had to? I know like politics and people's opinions is much more complicated than a political spectrum, but if you had to choose, like, what would you say? Where would you place yourself? I'm curious to hear what you guys' thoughts are on everything I just said.
My perspective is that like I have actually been like a really leftist person my whole life up until a few years ago. I'm not as like socialist, I guess, as I used to be, so I have like shifted a little bit more to the center. I do actually think like to my core I'm still like a center left person, and I think that like when the leftist parties like get out of this like horrible cycle that they're in, where they're focusing on, I would just say, like the dumbest issues, and they don't really have like a strong economic message, and their economic message is just tax the rich, which like it kind of got played out like 10 years ago, but they're still saying it, and now it's just moved on to like Elon derangement syndrome, which is I saw, like, I was driving down the highway today and I saw the sign that said F Elon. Somebody just spray painted on the wall. So that's like coming to Canada now. Like the Democratic talking points are now the talking points in Canada. And I just think that as long as the left is like silly and like operating on bad software, they're just not going to attract voters like me. People like me are just getting fed up. And I just think our podcast actually is fairly centrist, because I do watch some conservative podcasts online, and they don't talk about the issues we talk about. Like, so like culturally, I would not say we're conservative. We are like, I think that we're actually a lot more libertarian, and libertarians often like move in different directions. Like libertarians were very pro George Bush until the Iraq war got them all pissed off, and they all shifted to Obama. Now you have libertarians got Trump elected. So I think that like those kinds of voters who kind of sit in the middle and just believe in freedom and that kind of stuff are kind of what we represent. I think most of us seem to be leaning left on most cultural issues, but are disgusted with the current state of the progressive parties. I also think a lot of our libertarianism is just tied to the fact that we're Bitcoiners. So it's like automatically there. I think our actual political party is Bitcoin, a little bit of Dodge for me and Andy. But if I was to like say what my political party is, it's Bitcoin and Dodge. Us being like finance guys that are focused on like markets, we are like the people within leftist coalitions that usually leave the coalition first, because we like focus a little bit more on economic issues and we'll focus on cultural issues. Beyond that, like if I'm gonna just do like a general assessment of like leftist like echo chambers online, they're judgy, they're obnoxious, they eat their own, they're not very loyal. They've moved on to just attacking most people that come from like creator economy and that kind of stuff. Like they just don't value things that I value, things like technology. They become Luddites. Meanwhile, I think that the left is very much tied to doctrine. Like that's my biggest frustration, I can say, from personal conversations I have with my fellow leftist friends, is that every time I challenge doctrine, like political doctrine, it's like it just like goes, they just go right back to that, and they can't really challenge that stuff. So like simple doctrine is something like income taxes are progressive taxes, and if you get rid of income taxes, then you're taxing the poor. And like there's no like openness to discussing other taxation regimes on the left, for example. Or another example is like in Canada, if you are like a leftist, like if you're a Liberal Party member and you say like I want to defund the CBC, like that's not allowed. Like you're not allowed to be a liberal in Canada and not be for funding the CBC, especially if it's like if you're like leading the Liberal Party or discussing, like you're actually representing the Liberal Party in debate. Like there's a lot of like progressive doctrine that you can't really fight against when you're debating leftists. I find that especially leftists that are still loyal to the parties. So I just think that our podcast reflects like a centrist tone where people are just we're just sick of the liberals. We all have buyer's remorse and we want change. I don't think half of our podcast is going to be conservatives 10 years from now. But yeah, we probably will all vote conservative is my assumption in the next election. But I think it's actually because we're sick and tired of the bullshit. I think that's all what it comes down to. We just don't see any value in the progressive parties.
Yeah, I mean, I've already endorsed Pierre Poilievre, so I will definitely vote for him whenever the election is. And I think, Tristan, you've resisted calls to endorse a particular candidate, and I'm not going to force you to endorse a candidate today if you don't want to. But I keep saying this all the time, and I'll repeat it once again. I think that people are smart and voters are smart in general. And when you get into that voting booth, you might, say one thing online and say one thing to family and friends. But when you get into that voting booth, you're by yourself. And I think that everyone, not just you particularly, but just everyone in general, deep down inside knows what is best for the country and knows what is best for just you, your family, personally, right? So I think that everyone deep down inside already knows who is the best to vote for. And one last thing observation that I made is kind of funny. So you know how like you said, Sunil, that we're all Bitcoiners and our political party is Bitcoin. Well, Bitcoin is orange, right? And I see a lot of Americans that are like, oh, I hate the Republicans, I hate the Democrats, I'm going to vote orange in the election. And in Canada, that means something completely different because orange is the color of the NDP, which is even further left of the Liberals. And let's just say the NDP, they might be orange, but they're not very big fans of Bitcoin, let's just say. So it's just kind of funny to see how like a bunch of Canadians who are super anti-Pierre Poilievre going on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever, the liberal version. It's kind of like the liberal version of X, and they're like, "Oh, I'm voting orange to stop Pierre Poilievre," and I'm like, that means something different in my books. But okay, Tristan, I will give you a chance to express your opinion now.
Yes. Yes, I did ask this question initially to in their chat just to. Well, I wasn't asking if we were conservative necessarily. I was just asking what we were, and I think the consensus was that we're probably functionally conservative, just based on where politics is currently treating conservative. I would say we're probably more center than conservative in reality. And on that front, I think that I tend to be these days, I would probably be considered pretty centrist because I find this is a common scenario where I'm too right for the my left-leaning friends and I'm too left-leaning for my right-leaning friends. So I end up getting in disagreements with everyone because of that fact. And on that front, I think a lot of that stems down to the fact that I think I'm very left-leaning on some aspects. Well, I am much more realistic on other aspects, if that makes sense. So, for example, like on like a lot of like progressive stuff, like like gay marriage and gay stuff in general, I don't really care at all. Like I'm like, go for it, cool, that's great. Do you. That's all good with me. But then, like, when it comes to like economics and stuff, I'm like, you can't run 3 more small deficits and not cause problems. You just can't. The economics doesn't math. The math doesn't math. Math doesn't lie. Math doesn't. It doesn't care about your feelings. You wanna say that you can do that. You can't. It's just not how it works. You can't run deficits without causing inflation, and you can't push off spending, push off, like, have deficits, push off the burden onto the future generation without having the burden eventually falling on the present generation. And so I think that in a lot of aspects, I think there's been areas in which I've seen consistent failings from the liberal parties who's been in power, particularly, where in the past I've been relatively, I'm like, okay, you can run a deficit as long as what you're spending the money on increases the economy sufficiently to offset the amount of deficit that you're generating. This is technically a possibility. The problem is that you have to do that part of increase the economy, and the liberals did such a great job of not doing that I feel like they've completely lost my confidence in their ability to run a country, economically speaking, particularly well. And on that front, because of that perception I've gained, it's made it very hard for me to take a lot of the more left-leaning perspectives in terms of economic policy seriously, because it just feels like a lot of it is stuff that is going to be a lot of talk without much action actually occurring. And on that front, or if there is action, it is negative action, because it is just increasing a deficit that we can't sustain long term. So I feel like in some respects I've maybe gotten a little bit more right leaning, just purely because I'm more focused on the economic aspect these days. Particularly, I mean, as we're all Bitcoiners, so I think that we talk about finance a lot. We're all focused on finances, and I think it's really hard to not pay attention to a country's finances when it's the country you live in, and that's going to directly impact your life. And on that front, the way that the finances in our country is being handled often feels inefficient and detrimental in a lot of respects. And that's really, I think, where kind of my disagreement with a lot of what their policies have been has been stemming from. It's like, if the liberals had spent 3 deficits or whatever, however many deficits, back in 2015, and now we had high-speed rail between the Windsor to Quebec City corridor, we had cheap, efficient energy created across the country. We've reduced our reliance on non-renewables across, like in Alberta or something. Like if there was something to show for the money spent, I could be a lot more forgiving. But it really feels like 2015 happened. We elected the liberals. It's now 2025. What's changed besides everything getting more expensive? Like, and that's really what it comes down to for me. Is like, it's like we've spent all this money, and we can see the number of deficits we've run back to back to back to back. We spent all this money, and we have nothing to show for it. It feels like, and so it makes it very hard for me to trust that the left-leaning parties are going to have something to show for it at the end of running their next batch of deficits. And so on that perspective, I'm like, I can't. It makes it like I can't really trust that they're going to do a good job of running the country. And that's where my maybe more right-leaning perspective is kind of stemming from, is like, we're, from an economic perspective, it seems like the left has just, they spend a lot of money to make it seem like they're doing something, and in reality nothing actually happens, nothing gets better, nothing changes, we have nothing to show for it, and the money's gone, and now my houses cost twice as much as they did 10 years ago. Well, my income is not twice as high as it would have been 10 years ago. So that's kind of where it comes from.
Yeah, I can't believe after all those billions of dollars we spent, our trains still run on diesel. We have these 1960s trains still. Like, when are we going to replace them with something more modern? When are we going to get high-speed rail? Like, of all the things we spent money on, we spent it on government administration.
Yep. And they finally announced high-speed rail from Toronto to Quebec City as basically just a propaganda boost, is what it feels like. I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to get done in the next 30 years. Like, come on, really?
I also think it's crazy that, like, as somebody like me who is such an avid leftist, like, I was such an annoying leftist, and then all of a sudden, like, they turn against, like, all the things I love. Like, I became a Bitcoiner because I was basically like an anarchist, because Bitcoin's like an anarchist technology, and then the left are against Bitcoin now. They're against Bitcoin. They're pro censorship. They're against online privacy. Like, I don't know if you guys saw the news from England today or the UK. It's like the left doesn't stand for anything I stand for anymore. Like, all the core values I used to have, like the things I think of why I'm a leftist my whole life, I think of, like, the fact that the leftists were the people who stood up for free speech and civil rights for the last several decades. And now they don't stand up for those things anymore. Now they stand up for censorship, and they stand up for state power, and they stand up for all this silly crap that nobody cares about. And then they're going to be surprised when the voters kick them out of power and fire them from their jobs.
It's like they flipped an integer, you know? Like, they went too far on one side, and then at some point they just flipped all the way to the, like, complete opposite, you know? Like,
yeah, it's like a circular thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
They wanted to avoid being Hitler, and they became Stalin. Like, it's like that kind of thing.
Or like they wanted to avoid being racist, so they went all the way around to not being racist, that they became racist again.
I mean,
Pretty
that's
much.
literally exactly what happened. Did you guys see that interview with I think it was CBS and Marco Rubio, who I think they were talking about JD Vance's speech in Munich for the Munich Security Conference, where, you know, JD Vance basically blasted a lot of European countries for cracking down on free speech and the, you know, facilitating a migrant crisis and all this stuff. And that actually, I thought everything JD Vance said was perfectly reasonable, but, you know, a lot of European countries, I guess they took offense to that and was pushing back. And then the media, I just feel like is so biased, especially in Europe, obviously, but also in America, where a lot of these mainstream media platforms is like so obviously like pro-left or pro-Democrat, where there was a CBS interview with Marco Rubio where the CBS host, I think her name is Margaret Brennan, she was suggesting how free speech was weaponized by Nazi Germany to help Hitler come into power. And it's like, in what world would your worldview have to be so twisted? I don't know if she actually believes this, or she, like, you know, I don't know what she's thinking, but in what world can you get it so, like, can you get the facts so wrong that you believe that free speech is what caused Hitler to rise to power, right? Like, that's just, like, those are just completely two, like, it's like matter and antimatter, and when they meet each other they should explode, but apparently it doesn't in the mind of, like, you know, the mainstream media. And yeah, it's just like, this is the state which, you know, the Democratic Party, or all the, I wouldn't say all, but most of the leftist parties in the Western world, like the Liberals in Canada, the Democrats in the US, the Labour Party in the UK, and the SPD in Germany. We'll see, like, Germany's having an election soon, and it looks like the CDU is going to come back. But in my opinion, the CDU was also, even though they're supposed to be center right, they also contributed to a lot of the problems that Germany is facing right now. Because Angela Merkel, she was the leader of the CDU, and she was chancellor, and it was under Merkel that they shut down all the nuclear reactors and all that stuff. Super dumb decision, in my opinion. But story for another day. I just feel like that's kind of the state of the left right now, and it's a mess. So I hope that the Overton window shifts back to the right, and I think that, or not even to the, just shifts back to the center. Right, by shifting right, they're not going to the right, they're actually going to the center, like the window. Right, so I hope that happens, and I feel like it is happening, but we'll have to see. And one last point, I think we're being pretty reasonable on this show, right? I wouldn't say that we're like the new Alex Jones or anything like that. Like, we're not a cringy like extreme alt-right podcast. I think a lot of the stuff that we said over here is completely sensible, but obviously I'm biased on this. I kind of relate our show to the All In podcast, where I've said this before and I'll say it again, each one of us kind of has a doppelganger in the All In crew, right? Like, I'm probably aligned with David Sachs the most. Tristan, you're probably the most aligned with JCal. And then Dominic is most aligned with David Freeberg, who's just wants to talk about science and doesn't give a shit about anything else. And then for the longest time, we were missing a Chamath, but now we have a Chamath in Sunil. So season 2 is going to be great. Now that brings us to the end of tonight's show. If you guys don't have anything else you want to add, if not, I'll pass it to Tristan for the outro, since Dominic is not here.
All right. Well, thanks for watching the Zillennial Money podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channels. And we'll see you next time.
Have a good one.
Have a good weekend.